Okay. All right. So today's training on operational guidelines is going to cover all the modules and sections listed here. So before we wait any further, we're just going to go ahead and move into it. I'm using a department who does have a fairly robust set of OGs in FirePro, so we can see what that looks like when it's populated. Now, to start off with, some departments don't specifically refer to their OGs as operational guidelines. Sometimes it's operating procedures, sometimes it's SOGs. There's a variety of different naming terminologies we see out there. So one of the things that we let you do, if you want to, just to make sense, is in the setup menu, under the option called custom settings, there is a custom settings tab for the operational guidelines. If we click on that, we can actually see that the entire module is renameable, and you can also change the initials for the module. So if operational guidelines, operating guidelines is what you're using, you can change that up, just quickly save it. And that is going to, once I take a look, it's going to change that title on the home page. It's going to change it in the module. So that's going to allow you to customize this to be something that's maybe a little more consistent with your internal department policies and terminologies. When I look at an individual operational guideline and I go to print it out, it's designed to print as a relatively standardized document with a bunch of information. And what we can see on here is that there is a section for a department logo. And we can also have what we call a department header that appears on here. So if I go in, for example, I'll just quickly hop into department header here. Oops. So do that. And one. So I could say and what I can do is grab this with a print screen utility. And in your FirePro system, under the setup menu in system information, there's a section for a department banner. So I can put in this department banner. If you need a hand getting that into FirePro, you can absolutely just touch base with our technical support and they can assist you. Likewise, if you need to update the logo in your FirePro system, technical support can help you with that as well. But once that is in place, then when you print out your operational guideline, now we might need to tweak the size on this a little bit so it fits a bit better, a fairly long department name, but we can see that it's going to generate a more customized PDF for you of the operational guideline. It is also possible when you are building your operational guidelines to actually build multiple different policy types. So if you have operational guidelines and say we'll go with SOPs, we'll call it standard operating procedures. Or you can have a section on pay procedures and pay guidelines. This policy type dropdown can be edited to allow you to have several different types of policies in the system. Once you have those put in, then you have the ability in the home page to search just for specific policies. I'll have to close and reopen to add that policy to our search. But I can say, okay, show me only my standard operating procedures, and it'll give you that set or my operational guidelines. What you can also do when you are setting up your operational structure, just move that out of the way here, is that you can also build a variety of different sections in each individual policy type. So again, when I look at an individual record, I can see I've got a section drop down here, which is editable. So I can add as many different sections as I want. And these sections are searchable, so you can filter out a particular section at any time. And it's also something that will display on your system and print out on the individual operational guide. It is also possible, if you want to assign an operational guideline to a specific station. That way, if you have some station-specific documentation, guideline structures that you want to put in, you can generate those if you'd like to do that. Now, when we are building sections, we're normally going to be trying to build them, in the order that you want them to display. Now, we can also then go ahead and create one of these new operational guidelines by using the green plus button. Whenever I create a new OG, it's going to have an initial enter date attached to it. Operational guidelines also have the ability to track what we call revision date and reviewed date. So these are going to let us track when this OG was first entered or created, when did we last revise this thing, and has this operational guideline been reviewed. So we can call this 10.10. Is a test OG, goes in this top here. I can assign it to a specific section and a specific policy type. What I also have in here is an approved by field. So it's possible to track different officers who are approving an operational guideline, also officers who are reviewing operational guidelines. All these officer information fields are populated from an individual personnel record, and that happens in the employment tab under officer. So this is the standard officer list, which functions throughout the entire program. And it's the central log for who could be in charge of something. In the case of OG stuff, that's controlled by the OG officer tick box. So if someone is an operational guidelines officer, then they can approve an operational guideline and they can review an operational guideline. And we'll look at how that stuff works a little further down the line. But that's where the officer information on an OG comes from. In many cases, you'll start an OG without it being approved, but you might approve it a little further down the line. Now, the operational guidelines records come with a variety of standard tabs, which are fairly consistent in our experience with what we normally see on an operational guideline. However, it is possible to put in an alternative title for any one of these tabs on an individual operational guide. So if I wanted purpose to be called why we do this, I can just put this down in the alternative title. It doesn't update, so we can see right away that in this particular operational guideline, that alternative title is showing up. This doesn't affect other operational guidelines. We can see those ones still show the default label, but this lets us customize an individual OG with different tabs and section names as far as making sure that the breakdown is appropriate. You can also do this as a batch, and I'll show you how to do an entire set of OGs if you want to relabel. So each OG has a variety of different tabs. Generally speaking, the tab contents and the tab label will only print off on the operational guideline if you have populated some information in it. So if we look at some of these populated ones, we can see there's a purpose and a scope and a policy, but there's no exceptions, definitions, or procedures here. So if I print this out, I should generally just see the sections of the OG that I've actually filled out, as opposed to seeing any blank lines in them. Each OG section that you're filling out also has what we would call the full word processing section for FirePro enabled. That means that you can do things like create bulleted and numbered lists, set different fonts and texts and things like that. It is not a bad idea to remember that this this word processing functionality, you can usually copy paste directly from a Word document into here, but it's a good idea to check the results because there are some fonts and formatting that Word supports that the native word processing here doesn't. So occasionally you might get slightly different results in there. It's always a good idea to check that out. But this should allow you to have things, again, like bulleted lists, different fonts, things that you might want to adjust in. It is also possible to attach links directly to an OG. Generally, those links are mostly going to be for reference purposes. If there is, say, a supporting document that you want to attach in here. What some departments do is if they want to have a basic breakdown of their OGs for information like the OG, when it was created, and a basic structure, but they don't necessarily want to transfer all the OG information right into the tabs in FirePro, then they might just attach the OG PDF as an additional link. It won't print off quite the same way, but it does give you all the documentation and management tools without necessarily having to do the data entry or the copy paste, depending on what you're doing. But this is going to allow you to customize the individual operational guidelines a fair bit so that you have them and they're going to print off in an appropriate way. Any questions about any of that before I sort of move on to the next section, which talks a little bit more about management of review and review of OG? Again, you can just put any notes into the chat if you want, or take yourself off mute. Fire halls are noisy places as a general rule, so I do try to keep everybody on mute while we're working through this. Okay. Well, if any questions come up, pop them in the chat for me. We'll go over it. So broadly speaking, when I am looking at managing operational guidelines, the standard tools allow you to document when the OG was first created or entered into FirePro anyway, and the last time that the OG has been revised. There's also the ability to have what we call a review date on the OG. And normally the process is that after an OG is revised, it will get reviewed so that you can make sure that it's relatively up to date for yourself. So when I look on the standard list window, I can see I have a column for last revised so that I can see when the OG was last revised. If I want to, I can also add a last reviewed column so I can see when the OG specifically was reviewed most recently. So this is going to give me the ability to see when these OGs were revised and reviewed. You can also search by revision date. So I could say, show me only OGs that have been reviewed in the last 36 months or a different time period, for example. There's also, and I'll just set that back to all dates. There's also a quite a handy search function here, which is called reviewed out of date. So this checkbox searches for two things on this window for you. So the first thing it searches for is any OGs that have not been reviewed at all. So if they're not reviewed, then it will find them. What it'll also do is look for OGs where the review date is later than the revision date. So for those records, it will say, okay, these have been reviewed, but the OG is out of date. So you might want to re-review it because it hasn't been reviewed since it's been last revised. So that can be also a helpful tool for quickly saying, okay, let's find OGs that are that need to be reviewed. If as an officer, you're wanting to make sure that these are up to date. Also, some departments have policies relating to how frequently you want OGs to be reviewed. So for example, I could say, find me from the start of time to January 1st, say they need to be reviewed every 5 years, January 1st, 2019. And this is going to show me only OGs that have been revised during the longer than 5 years ago time period. Can we track and view past revised copies of an OG? Yeah, so one option certainly to do that with an OG is if you wanted to keep a previous revision, the simplest thing to do there would be say, okay, we're going to have a new revision of this OG. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this version as inactive. I will create a duplicate of this. And then I can put in the newly revised version of the OG. That would allow me to then go back if I wanted to and say, show me the inactive versions of that of these operational guidelines, so I can see the pre-revision version of those if I'd like to do that. So, you know, the duplicate function can be a really handy way of saying, okay, we're going to do a new revision on this thing. We're going to bring it forward so that we can have an updated one here as well. So another thing that you can do if you want to is, let's just go in and do active only, is say, for example, you have done a major review of all your OGs, you've gone through them, you don't want to go through each OG and tick it off as reviewed. And if to review an OG, you would just click on the not reviewed button, and that will flag the user profile that reviewed it and the date that the operational guideline was reviewed. But if you wanted to do that as a batch, all you need to do is left click and drag to highlight a bunch of operational guidelines, right click on the window and say mark as reviewed. Likewise, I can say I might want to go in and say, oh, you know what, actually these aren't reviewed. I can do the same thing, right? Mark as unreviewed. So it'll take them out of the reviewed structure. You can also right click and highlight to set a large number of OGs as inactive. So if, for example, we know that a whole section of these are no longer active OGs, I can just highlight them, right click, mark as inactive, and that's gonna take those out of the standard set and allow you to look at them if you need to, but take them out of the standard roster of operational guidelines. Now, we have the ability in FirePro at any time, if you want to quickly email out either individual OGs or an entire OG package, if you want to do that. So, for example, if I just wanted to email an individual OG to somebody, I just need to open it, select the print function, and I can print directly to email if I want to do that. That will send it as a PDF document. So this would essentially send a PDF copy of an individual OG to one or more people if you wanted. I'm also going to show you how to do this at a much more automated level for large numbers of department members or for a new member of the department. It's also possible to highlight all the OGs, generate the details report, and that will send a single PDF of all the operational guidelines to an individual. There is also the section index here, which is going to allow you to quickly pull up a view of your OG index, essentially, which is just built automatically based on the various different sections that you've built throughout there. So it's going to pull that up for you as well. Now, we also have a tool in FirePro that lets you create what we call sign-off logs for operational guidelines. If you want to turn that on, you can go into the Setup menu under Custom Settings. And again, in the OG module, there's an option here called Use Sign-offs. So what this is essentially going to do is track for each member of the department, have they been sent this OG through the system, and have they signed off on the OG. So in this case, I'm just going to quickly save that. It's just going to take a second because it has to go through and generate an OG sign-off record for each individual person. Once the sign-off is created, there's going to be a couple different places that you can check OG sign-off for yourself. So we'll just let that finish its little to-do list. Probably should have gone with a smaller OG set, but it's nice to see a populated one and what this can look like. And so this is basically going to set it up so each firefighter has an index of all the operational guidelines attached to their personnel record, and it's going to track when did we send this to them and have they signed off on it or not. Now, this tool also allows you to automate things like if you do a new revision of an OG, it will prompt you, do you want to send a copy of this to all the members of your department so that they have it available for review. Let's just go through that in just a second. Okay, So now that I have OG sign off turned on, this is going to appear in a couple of different places. So the first place it will appear is on the operational guidelines themselves. There is now a personnel sign off tab for these records. So it is actually going to show me everybody in the department, and it's going to track, have they had this OG sent to them, and have they signed off on the OG? At this point in time, we don't have a tool which automatically tracks whether they sign off or not. That is one of the things that we're planning for the web forms tool, where you send a digital link to the OG and the person can read it and hit sign off on it. But that's a little further down the line. We're working on some other tools for that right now. But what this lets you do is, if you wanted to send a copy of this OG to all of these members of the department, I can just left click and drag to highlight, or I could just do it a station at a time, for example, say send everybody from station 2. And then I right click on this window and select send OG. So you can mark them as having been sent. And what the system will do is automatically attach everyone's email to this OG and send that particular operational guideline as an attachment. So everybody gets a copy. It also keeps track of the fact that they have been sent this OG, because the idea is that you want to track when did they have it sent to them. You can also, if you want to, right from the individual OG, highlight a number of people, right click and select sign. And that's just going to keep track of the date, the current date, and identify when they signed off on an OG. So if you're doing a review of an operational guideline at a training session, you can just quickly identify who was there and sign them all off on it quickly. Now, what also happens here is that at an individual personnel record basis, so if I look at members of Station 2, I can go into their personnel file. Under their employment, there's an OG sign-offs tab. So this is actually going to keep track of all the operational guidelines in the department and whether the person has been sent that OG and the date that they have potentially signed off on. Just like the other area, if you want to send OGs to an individual person, you can highlight and drag, and then we'll just hold down Shift, which quite a few of them, and then right click and say send OG. And this is going to generate a OG package with all the operational guidelines, send it to that individual person, and you can then sign off that they had it sent to them on that date. Likewise, if somebody gets back to you, they return the OG package all signed off and ready to go, then you can highlight that, again, highlight all the OGs they've signed off for that person, right click and select sign off. So it's going to show, okay, they had this OG sent to them and the sign off, and this tracks it for each individual person. So you can quickly pull that information up. What you can also do with this is, from an individual, from the personnel module, there's some reports here where I can say, for this station, show me everybody who has not signed off on specific OGs. I probably should have signed off some more people on more operational guidelines before I did this particular report, but it's basically going to give you a list of, for each person, these are the OGs that they have not currently signed off on, if I want to keep track of that or generate a report against it. But you're always able to see that on an individual operational guideline. So I asked for a very large report here, so it might just take a second. So we can see this is a list of the ones that Robert has not signed off on. And then the ones that Tony has not signed off on, Mark has not signed off. So that's going to give me a breakdown of the various different OGs someone hasn't completed. What you can also do with this tool is, I should point out one thing. So whenever we're sending emails and notifications out of the software, on an individual's personnel record, right at the front, there's this correspondence information. This is the email address that the system's going to use when it's sending out the OGs. So this is kind of the automated, this is what I want to send the operational guidelines or any other emails that you're sending automatically or manually out of file. So what I can also do now with the operational guidelines is, say in this example, I have a bunch of people, and what I'll just do is take a look at this one where I've got a bunch of people who have signed off on this OG. And in fact, I'll actually highlight and sign off everybody for it. So say we know that all the current members of the department have been sent this OG and have signed off on it. But now we're doing a revision of the operational guideline. So we're saying, okay, we're going to put in a new revision date here. And the first thing it does is it asks, do you want to clear the sign-off date for all personnel? So that's essentially going to let me quickly clear, because I just entered the sign-off date. Let's do a more accurate breakdown of that. Sign off. So now if I go in and I review or I revise the OG, it's going to ask me if I want to clear the sign-off date. So that should be breaking the sign-off date out, which allows you to quickly flag that people need to have the OGs resent to them. Likewise, you can then highlight and resend a reviewed OG just to make sure that has been resent to members of the department. You can also, if you want to, highlight a large number of operational guidelines from the main window and make sure that they have been signed off by using the personnel sign not signed off report. So this is going to show you for each operational guideline which members of the department are not currently signed off on it if you're wanting to check sort of in the other direction. So we'll just again, I probably should have just picked a couple of them, but hey, I like to go big because let's put the software through its paces while we're so we can see there's a variety of people who are not signed off for an individual operational guideline. So there's also some other tools that we have available in the module. So one of the tools is in the red toolbox is the export OG function. What this does is it creates a file that you can send to another fire department that uses FirePro, and they can import into their software. So the export file, you can export individual sections or the entire thing. OG export. Let's say we're going to do it in the downloads folder. And when I look in the downloads, I have a couple of files, sections, and subjects. So these are the export files. If you send those files to another department that uses FirePro, they can import them directly into the software in order to pre-populate their operational guidelines set. If you want more details on that, support can send you a detailed breakdown. Another option that you have is if your tab titles are consistently different than the standard ones that we have on here, like you don't call it scope, you call it range everywhere, for example, you can go into the red toolbox, select adjust tab titles, and say, okay, for all of these items, I want my tab 2 title to be set to range. Hit red titles. And it means that that tab title is now set for all operational guidelines to range. Right? So we can make bulk changes to the tab titles. You can do it for an individual set of operational guidelines. There is also an option here called print OG to PDF. So what this is going to do is take the entire OG package as well as an index and print it all out in as individual OGs. So we can see here, we have all of our OGs popped out as PDF documents, which means I can look at any individual one and take a look on there. So that's going to allow me to print off every single one of my OGs as a big package or as separate PDFs normally. The final tool that you have on here is to send sign off many OGs. So what this is going to do is allow me to say, pick a large number of personnel from the department and pick a large number of operational guidelines. And in this case, we could say, yeah, just go there, say, pick a large number of operational guidelines. And I can then set my send date to the date that I gave them all the OG, or I can sign people off on this large number of operational guidelines all at once. And so I can quickly update that information. So if I look at an individual person, it will have them sent or signed off on an individual OG. So this tool lets them flag all this stuff. It also gives you the ability right away to, for each individual person that you selected, automatically send an OG email for each one of those with those operational guidelines attached to it. So if you wanted to do the send all at the same time, it lets you do that too. So there's a whole range of tools that kind of let you manage that sending and sign off piece depending on how you want to do it. So that kind of covers the entire range of the operational guidelines module. Do people have other questions about how that is working?